Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session on this interactive webinar series and this session on biodiversity information from data to decisions. We're in our second session today, so this is part of a series on biodiversity mainstreaming organized by the Connect project. And it's wonderful in the registration that we saw so many people from across different parts of the world who registered and who we see tuning in today. My name is Stefan. I'm from Prospects, one of the Connect partners, and I'll be moderating the discussion today, along with my partner in crime, Kira Booth from UNEP-WCMC. Kira, how are you on this Monday?
I'm great, thank you, Stefan. I've been looking forward to this event for a long time, so it's great we could bring everyone together here today.
Perfect. I wasn't going to make a comment or ask a question about the football, but so we've bypassed that one. That's perfect. So we also have some wonderful speakers lined up for you today. So thank you so much to our speakers already for joining us. We have Consolata Akayo, and she's the Assistant Commissioner, Information and Communications at the Ministry of Agricultural, Animal Industry and Fisheries in Uganda. We have Winfried Nelson, who's Chief Analyst in the Development Coordination Division at the National Development Planning Commission in Ghana. We have Emmanuel Odame, who's the head of the Field Services Unit of the Directorate of Agricultural Extension Services at the Ministry of Food and Agriculture in Ghana. And then we have Leah Wanamwa Nice. She's Senior Policy Officer at the Directorate of Sustainable Environment and Blue Economy at the African Union Commission. And last but not least, we also have Abisha Mapendembe, who's Program Officer at the UN Environment Program World Conservation Monitoring Center, or UNEP-WCMC in short. So a quick note about the Connect project. So Connect is a project funded by the Global Environment Facility, or GEF. It's implemented by UNEP and is executed by UNEP-WCMC. And what Connect really aims to do is to mainstream biodiversity into government decision-making in 3 countries in particular in sub-Saharan Africa, so in Ghana, Mozambique, and Uganda. And we have some key partners, of course, in those respective countries. So that's the Ghana's National Biosafety Authority. We have the government of Mozambique, and we also have Uganda's National Environment Management Authority. So key partners in those countries from the Connect project. Now, the key concept that you'll hear regularly throughout this session was the main theme also for this interactive webinar series is biodiversity mainstream. So how do we really popularize and stimulate that sense of biodiversity stewardship across sectors, programs, projects, policies, and actions? So this is a series. We had our first session on project best practices last week. So if you haven't had the chance, the recording of that session will be available soon. And then you'll be able to re-watch the really rich exchange that we had with our great speakers during that session. We have our third and final session tomorrow, which is all about improving the value chain of biodiversity data. And it's all about obstacles, gaps, and opportunities of that data value chain. And if we could have the registration link in the chat, I think that would be great. So please do sign up if you haven't already. Now, for this session, what we're looking at here is the tools for better cross-governmental decision-making, the challenges and benefits of biodiversity mainstream. So that will be the central topic for this session today. And what we're really trying to do with this session is identify the needs and challenges of using biodiversity information for decision-making across sectors, but then also showcase how it can be done. So how can biodiversity mainstreaming support cross-governmental decision makers? If we can go to the next slide, please, Laura. Thank you. Just a quick note then on housekeeping. So overall, this will very much be an interactive session. So we will be fielding Q&As, we will be fielding polls as well, and giving you the opportunity to take the floor. That being said, please do liberally use the chat function while we're having this session, so we can bring those comments in as we go along. So on that note, if I could ask all participants, but also all of our collaborators, to just introduce yourself in the chat function, your organization, and where they are from. It would be great to get an idea of who's in the room today. So please do go ahead and put in those comments via the chat function. Thank you. Then for the rest of the housekeeping, so this session will be recorded. If there's any issues, please do let us know. Now for the duration of the session, your microphone will be muted and your camera will be off when you join the meeting. But when you take the floor, and if you raise your hand, for example, we'll bring you in. So if you take the floor, please turn on your camera, and of course, keep turn your microphones on at that time. So also, yes, in very much so on questions, please ask your questions via the chat function. But again, we'll bring you in when we can, and we'll pause regularly so you can also take the floor. Just a quick note, because we will be sharing presentation as we are doing now, the easiest what we find is just to use the side-by-side notes. So that way you can see the presentation, but also the presenters. And then finally, we have our very own Laura from UNEP-WCMC. She's the technical support for this session. So if you have any technical issues, please do just send her a direct message, and then we can help you solve some of those problems. And if we can have the next slide, thank you. We do have live interpretation into Portuguese. So we have Myra and her wonderful team in the background here running that simultaneous interpretation. So for those who would like, they can click on the globe logo with the subtext interpretation below. And that way you can follow the session also in Portuguese. And Myra already put in some instructions on that interpretation in the chat, so please have a look if there's a need from your side. Also, a quick note again for myself, but also anyone that will take the floor there, please do speak slowly so our interpreters can more effectively interpret what you're saying. That very much includes me as well. And great to see people tuning in and commenting. Hi, Paul. From who's PhD candidate at the University of Ghana. Hi, Consolat, and hi, Michael. Great to see people using the chat function. So without further ado, before we get into our first presentation from Consolata, we'd like to do a first audience poll as well. So if we could bring that up, great. Thank you, Laura. So here's a question to everyone in the room. So what type of information of biodiversity do you require to support policy planning in your sector? So that applies to our speakers, but also, of course, to our participants. Do have a think about this question. You can go to menti.com and use the code that you see here. And Laura just put in the code as well and the link as well to the poll. So have a think about this question. What type of information of biodiversity do you require or do you need to support policy planning in your sector? Take a minute to think it through, and then you can submit your answers. Now, please use only a few words because this will be a word cloud. And then we can have some succinct inputs on that question. We will use those inputs as we go through the session. So have a think. What type of information of biodiversity do you require to support policy planning in your sector? What are really your needs when it comes to this biodiversity information? Giving you a bit of time to think about this question, and then we hopefully should have some inputs coming in shortly. Wonderful to see everyone commenting in the chat function. Arpana, George, and James, also from the Connect project. Hi, James. Here we go. So we do have already some inputs. We have, so what type of information would be useful? We have information on species density, in the same vein on migration patterns, on population sizes as well. So those are clearly linked to species and wildlife. Then we have data to build resilience. So that's an interesting point. And perhaps there's a link there with disaster risk reduction. This is one of the areas of work from one of our panelists. So we can touch on this later as well. Then we have spatial data. We have points on trends. So not just current data, but also projecting towards the future, those trends of in biodiversity. And we'll try to bring that for the sort of foresight as well as we go through the session. This is really useful and we use as a reference framework for the rest of our session. So if during the session you hear a speaker give a comment, or they make a point where you think, actually, I hadn't thought about this. This would actually be really useful biodiversity information that I could use, or I know someone else could use, then do put this into the Mentimeter, and we can sort of see this expanding word cloud as we go through the session. Perfect. And on that note, we see some additional points coming in. So one additional point here, information about ecosystem diversity. Great. So without further ado, I think we can go to our first speaker. So I'd like to introduce Ms. Consolata Akayo. She's the Assistant Commissioner for Information and Communications at the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries in Uganda. Consolata, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan and the team. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, wherever you are. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Yes, I'm grateful to be here today. And I'm happy to see my colleagues from Uganda also around. I hope there are many other persons. Good afternoon to everyone. So let's move on to the next slide. The next slide indicates the outline of the presentation I'm going to give us. And since we are all from outside, we have people from outside Uganda, I'll give you just a few slides on an overview so that all of us are at par. And then we'll look at the current main policy priority. We'll also look at the perspective of biodiversity before we get on to the challenges. Let's move to the next one. Thank you very much. You will all agree with me, or maybe you've heard before, that Uganda is the Pearl of Africa. Indeed, to date is still the Pearl of Africa. We are a landlocked country surrounded by a number of other countries. It's a fairly large land, covering about 140,000 square kilometers. Out of that, we have about 21% of it is land that is cultivated. But we also have about 45% that is woodland and grassland. I've already told you, agriculture is the backbone of our economy. It has a beautiful climate. It's equatorial with a moderate altitude. We can feed the whole region, actually. It's quite good for agriculture. The population, we are doing well. We are about 42 million people. And our population growth rate is slightly higher than our economic growth. So it's at 3.2%. Sorry. Majority of our farmers are small-scale farmers. We want to move away from small-scale to commercial. And we have large oil deposits. So if you have that interest, you're welcome to Uganda. So as we are being an agricultural country, we have to, the ministry looks at the vision of being competitive, being profitable, and sustainable. So that is what we look up to. And our mission is to transform agriculture from subsistence to commercial. So in terms of biodiversity, when you look at it, all of you are beginning to ask me questions. Are we not going to destroy more of our more of our biodiversity already? So let's look into that. Let's move to the next slide. Thank you. We needed to look at the priority for the agriculture sector. After 5 years, we come up with the plan for the country. This year ended, the 2020 ended the previous 5 years. So from 21, we are beginning a new 5-year plan, which is worked on by the National Planning Authority. So for the agricultural subsector, we have what they called agro-industrialization. Now, in this system, what we are going to have to undertake, it's going to be a program approach which brings on board different players. For example, here I've pulled out the key objectives of what we are supposed to achieve. One of them, for example, is increasing agricultural production and productivity, looking at post-harvest handling and storage, looking at improving agro-processing and value addition. We are looking at market access, competitiveness of agriculture in domestic and international market. We're also looking at increasing mobilization and equitability of access and utilization of agricultural finances. We're also looking at strengthening institutional coordination for improved services. In all this that we are undertaking, agriculture, for example, does not work alone. We are supposed to work with a number of other stakeholders. For example, we have Ministry of Water coming up on board. We need energy to come up and give us energy. We need a number of other stakeholders to come up as we undertake our different activities, including NEMA, wildlife, and all the others that we feel they should help us achieve the objectives that we have to undertake now. So we have what they call the program approach. In the program, all the players come together. We sit on a round table and we agree who should do what. And then roles and responsibilities are divided and resources given as per the achievement of that particular sector. This time round, we are bringing on board non-state actors to implement with us. When the National Planning Authority comes up with the sector priority, with the sector strategy, not one person does it. It's not meant for government alone. It's meant for all the players, government and non-government. So this time we are bringing on board non-state actors to sit with them on the round table. And this is one thing we've not been doing before. So it is a little different this time. I'm sorry that I'm taking a little longer here, but I want to make the point come out clear because we've not done this before. We are beginning to do it this time, this financial year, under the NDP3, National Development Plan 3. So this is where we are beginning to implement with our other stakeholders. So these are some of the priorities that we are supposed to undertake. You're going to ask me and tell me biodiversity is not seen here. It may not be the word biodiversity may not appear here, but in the activities that we are undertaking under all these objectives, we note well that biodiversity is a must for us that we have to undertake. It is part and parcel of us. So let's move on to the next slide and we see. Thank you very much. Here we are trying to look at the demand for the biodiversity information. I indicated earlier on here that I sit in the steering committee for Connect project. And as the development of the biodiversity information is being undertaken, I partook in that and personally have appreciated what is transpired under this. And also what we have in Uganda here is the Ministry of Agriculture has guided the country by dividing the country into 10 zones, 10 agroecological zones. So with the 10 agroecological zones, it guides you on what you should do, what kind of plant needs to plant, crops or whatever activity has to be undertaken in which part of the country. Now, this is where we come in very strongly with the biodiversity information product that is being developed. We look through that in collaboration with the agroecological zones that is being developed. And this really can help us achieve much, much better than what we anticipated before. Because if there was enough time, I would actually explain to you how we have lost so much of our forest coverage in the country. We've lost a lot of that, almost half of it is already gone. Gone to what? Gone to quite a number of things. Probably agriculture is one of it, maybe timber, maybe construction, maybe a number of other activities. It's really taken a number of our forest areas. So we've lost more than a half. Losing more than a half, what does it mean to us? It means we're going to lose quite a number of other things. So it doesn't mean that we don't need all these. The demand for biodiversity information is very crucial for us at this particular moment. It is very, very crucial. We need it. We need to stop deforestation. We need to stop all these other activities so that we are able to maintain what we have. We've already lost quite a number of things. So under here, we are trying to look at the demand for biodiversity information. So under agricultural biodiversity, we see that in agriculture, we see biodiversity is quite useful for both animal and crops. So animal here, we even refer to the fishery subsector, we push it under animal. And some of this, we look at maintenance of the quality of water for our fish. Once we destroy them, we are losing out the fish species and the others. Uganda has quite a number of fish species. So once we destroy our water bodies, we pollute them. We are destroying some of the very rare species of fish. Actually, we have one in the local language, we call it Angara. It's very special. I don't think there is any other Angara in any other part of Africa. It is only in Uganda. So we don't need to lose that. We need to protect it. We need this for provision of food and nutrition security, biological pest control. If you're not careful, Uganda has gone through quite a number of things of late. The new kind of diseases coming on board. Why are they coming up now? Probably they were hidden down in the forest. We are not sure. We have destroyed those forests and allowed them to come up. We are not sure about that. We are losing out on species of food, which we used to eat those long time ago. Our grandparents eat them. They were very special. The medicinal things, we are losing out on those. So we need them. We need them for food nutrition. We need them for biological pest control, and as well as for genetic biodiversity in both crops, livestock, and the others. So we also need biodiversity to rehabilitate our soil, to improve its formation and help control erosion. If you're not careful, in the eastern part of Uganda, we have had a number of soil erosion affecting people so badly. Other people had to be evacuated and moved to another place and rehabilitated. And that is not very good for us. So we need a lot of work to be done in all these areas. So these are some of it. And we have the habitat provision for wildlife species. We have the herbal medicine. And by the way, the herbal medicine is becoming quite an important aspect in the country. If we're not carefully, today, I think we should be the first country in the world to probably we are going to be the first to get the medicine for COVID-19, because now a number of people are getting recovered from that. So we need this. And if I've also stated here that in 2018, we earned over $100.6 million as a result of selling herbal medicine. And it is projected that by 2026, it might go up to about 139.7 billion, which is an increment of about 4.2%. So Uganda is actually, it's also one of the countries where you can have more than 10 food types on a single buffet. I don't know which other country can do that. Probably in the world, we are the only one. And we need to protect these food species that we're working on. Now, so special strength, not only for food and feeds, but also we need to provide for the other areas. This one is now gone down, I can't see it very well. So can we move to the next one? So this is why we actually need to demand for biodiversity as agriculture in Uganda. We need it. It is very paramount for us. It is so part and parcel for us. Now, the biodiversity information that we have produced, the maps talks for itself. They give it to you, it tells you what you should do. So I think that one is quite crucial for the country. Can we move to the next one? Hello, are you hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Apologies, let's just pull that up.
Thank you.
Nothing beats live television, does it?
Thanks, Kira.
Oh, next.
There we go. Sorry. Go for it, Consolata. Yes.
Okay. Ooh. Yes, sorry, it wasn't very clear. Thank you. So here we are going to look at some of the challenges that we have faced as a country in terms of accessing the biodiversity product information. One of them is that traditionally agriculture contributes to creating landscape rich in biodiversity. You will agree with me on that. However, it also faces quite a number of other challenges, as I'm going to explain here. One of them is that habitat destruction or destruction of natural ecosystem. I tried to explain that earlier. We have a number of beautiful natural ecosystems, but because of a number of issues, maybe greed, maybe ignorance, maybe everything, we go on destroying them, which is very unfortunate, really. And I believe we have already started reaping, the benefit of that destruction. And we see the floods, we see the droughts, we see the prolonged dry spell, and a number of things being destroyed. So that is as a result of the destruction we have put onto our natural ecosystem. Fragmentation, with degradation of the system, we are over exploiting a number of our species, mostly for human use, really. That is our greed. I call it greed. Introduction of other exotic species which we never had, and we didn't know what these things meant in our country. I'll give you an example of probably the water hyacinth. Somebody introduced it into the country as a beautiful flower, but look at what that has done to us. It has destroyed our water bodies, it has destroyed our fish species, and that is not very good for us. And then increase of the spread of diseases, as I was explaining. We have quite a number of diseases coming up, a number of worms, a number of pests and vectors, both in animals and in human, as well as in crops. Different kinds of diseases coming up, and you cannot explain. We don't know where they're coming from. This country has stayed for over 70 years. Over 70 years. Before the last time we had locusts was 70 years ago. This time we have had locusts again. And they came in, they did destruction. For whatever reason, we should begin waking up, knowing that this is no time to play with our natural ecosystems. The invasion of alien species, the habitat changes, which I'm talking about, the nutrient loading and pollution, the climate changes that we see. I think we need to wake up and do more than we are doing now. I tried to mention on deforestation, and that we've lost more than half of the forest cover. Desertification, it's coming up because we are creating it. We need to wake up, plant more trees, and do better land cover management to ensure that we don't create more desert around. The marine environment, increasing the wildlife trade. We have our wildlife, our zoo, our parks, our national resources, and we are destroying them. We go and kill off all these animal species. There are others which have become now very rare species. We have destroyed all of them. Why? Because we want to eat as if eating is the only thing. Because we want maybe the trunks, we want parts of the animals to sell. That is all great. So I think we need to do a lot to ensure that we protect the inhabitants. We need to protect our environment. I've already talked of introducing new varieties, new species, some of them exotics we don't know, changes in our eating habits. I want to give you an example here. For example, rice. Rice was not Ugandan main food, but today as I talk, is almost the only food children want to eat. And where do we plant our rice? We take them to the wetland. And what are we doing to the wetland? We are doing destruction. So changes in our eating habits is also causing us some of the problems that we are facing today. So in all this, what else do I have to say? We need to really strategize on sensitization. We need to sensitize the ministries, departments, and agencies. We need to sensitize the local government. We need to sensitize the non-state actors. Everybody needs to be aware. Our farmers, we want to commercialize, move from subsistence to commercial. But these people also need to be sensitized to understand what is it that we are talking about. What do we need to remove? What do we need to retain? What kind of crop can we grow in a particular place? And how should we grow them? How should we maintain our food crops? Do we need chemicals? Do we need pesticides every now and again? If you're not carefully, most of the food we are eating are full of pesticides. What is it doing to our bodies? Are full of chemicals. Can we sensitize people to understand all this well? So all this really, if we do enough sensitization and people understand what it is that we have to undertake, then in this program which we are beginning now, in our NDP3, as we plan and implement it, we shall be doing the right thing at the right time, because people understand the importance of biodiversity. They will understand how they can utilize the natural resources they have. How can we use the land we have? How can we protect the beautiful species we have? We have things which other people do not have. So I think this is very important. We need to really come together and work as colleagues. We need to strengthen coordination within the non-state, with the state, with the government and every other person, development partners. I think that is very paramount. So this is what I can really share with us now within the shortest time we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Consolata. And I think it was particularly interesting to hear from you how biodiversity and environmental protection is not just essential for those ambitious plans that you have for development, but also if you don't have them, how you then are not resilient to some of the impacts that we're seeing, including from climate change. So, biodiversity protection is really paramount, as you said. There's two questions that came in from George Esegbe that I'd like to raise to you, Consolata. So the first one is, what are the key food security commodities and key export agricultural commodities? Are they threatened by the environmental degradation? So I think you alluded to some of those already, Consolata. And the second question that George raised was, how is Uganda managing the operations of the extractive industries and sustainably managing biodiversity? So you did mention some oil development projects. So how do you really square those two? So please, Consolata, your answers. Yeah, the floor is yours. You're still on mute, Consolata. Go for it, please.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you, George. Thank you, George, for your concern. We have quite a number of key food securities that we have in the country. We have actually prioritized about 14 crop and animal and animals that are the main priority for the country. But much as we prioritize 14, also it doesn't mean that we are not going to work on the others. We still have a responsibility for all the other species and varieties of crops that we have, crops, animals, and fish that we have in the country. It is our responsibility as a Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry, and Fisheries. But mainly what we looked at includes coffee, tea, cocoa. We are looking at maize, we are looking at banana, we're looking at milk, we are looking at dairy, we are looking at citrus. There are quite a list. I wish I had the list here. I would really share them all with you. But all in all, it doesn't mean we are working only on this. The others are equally part of still part of our responsibility. Even though the biggest part of our resources is put on what we have planned to undertake, because this is where we are able to get more resources. more money for the country, and where we can help people to, we look at that in terms of food security, we look at it in terms of nutrition, we look at it in terms of income. So gradually we shall continue moving as we scale off from the others. About the coordinate, how would you like to hear how to coordinate Ministry of Environment?
That's the other question, Consolata. So the second question from George was, how is Uganda managing the operation of the extractive industries and sustainably managing biodiversity? That was the second question.
Now, the extractive industries here, we are looking at maybe the petroleum and the others, the oil and the others. Our oil is new. We haven't even started. We're already doing the extraction, is still in its crude form. We haven't felt the benefit of it. So everything is still down there. But talking about all that, people have already felt the effect. It has already affected quite a number of people. Because, for example, in the area where they discovered that there is oil, all the people had to leave. They had to compensate them and they moved to another place. Once you move from one place to another, you get disturbed. And probably, maybe they didn't, there were quite a number of issues actually. I believe most of them probably didn't get exactly what maybe they felt they should have. And to start a new life is not an easy thing. So we believe that much as they are undertaking all this extraction and the rest of it, they will rethink of the environment, because part of the area is in the national park. That means our wildlife is equally affected in part of those places where they have got the oil for extraction. But but they are trying to see how they can move without interfering with the livelihoods of the animals around that area. I know that NEMA and the others are aware of what is going on, and I believe they will definitely do the right thing when it comes to, as they were moving around those areas and doing the extraction.
If I may, Consolata, let's, I propose that we leave the third question from Ombeni. We put it for the interactive panel discussion. And I'll bring in the next speaker, and then we'll have that discussion or the answer to that question later on. I'd like to get to the next speakers, if I may. But I think you made an excellent point. I think there also for the extractive industry, there's a huge need for biodiversity data as well to make sure that you keep the balance there between protecting biodiversity, but also that economic development that people need to build sustainable livelihoods. Excellent. Thank you so much, Consolata. And we'll, of course, get back to you when we get to the interactive panel discussion.
Welcome,
Excellent. I'd like to bring in our second speaker, Mr. Winfred Nelson. He's Chief Analyst at the Development Coordination Division of the National Development Planning Commission of Ghana. Please, Winfred, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I would like to take it from the point of view, I'm not using PowerPoint. I want to tell the story of the National Development Planning Commission and mainstreaming biodiversity into the National Development Planning and Budgeting processes. First of all, I'd like to state that the National Development Planning Commission, based on the 1992 Constitution of Ghana, which is the highest law you have in the country, is required to advise the President of the Republic of Ghana, Parliament, and then on its own initiative on national development policy planning processes. Having said this, I would also like to state that Article 87 in the National Constitution, which happens to be the highest law in the nation, requires the National Development Planning Commission to make proposals for the protection of natural and physical environment. So this gives us the opportunity to mainstream environment issues, and more specifically, biodiversity issues. So what the National Development Planning Commission does is to work with all the sectors, and we have about 50 sectors, they keep changing, but roughly about 50 sectors, that's ministries, departments, and agencies. And then we also work with 260 districts, call them district assemblies, the local governments. When we talk about mainstreaming, basically we are looking at how we can get issues of biodiversity. One, not only issues of biodiversity, but our interest is also interweaving the issues of biodiversity into other socio-economic activities. So it's not just in a silo. How does it interface with climate change? How does it interface with other things, social things, and so on and so forth? First, we look at it in the policy, the national government policy framework, and we have long-term development policy framework, now Ghana at 100, which you will find biodiversity issues there. Then you also have what you call planning. So by law, we have to translate the policies, and this time including biodiversity issues, into planning. And these planning guidelines will require all the district assemblies, all the sectors, to prepare, taking into consideration issues of biodiversity, as I said, how it interprets climate change and so on. And we then subsequently have to prepare checklists and ensure that these issues reflect in the plans of these sectors and MMDAs. Then we also have, often we leave it there, but in Ghana, we ensure that we have what we call budgeting and implementation, because if you say just mere lip service of the issues in there without attending to them, it's another matter. So we look at budgeting and implementation issues. So if you have biodiversity issues there, the intentions, you want to protect wildlife and so on, how are you going to do it? And this will work closely with Ministry of Finance. Aside that, we also work with other development agencies and private sector to ensure that we get funding to come on board. Having done that, we also look at what we call monitoring and evaluation. As I said, it's not mere talk, but we need to develop also monitoring and evaluation indicators to ensure that what we said we'll do in terms of mainstreaming, we are actually doing. So that sets the scene for broadly mainstreaming of what we do at the National Development Planning Commission. So essentially it's about integrating and interweaving biodiversity issues in other socioeconomic and also other socioeconomic activities. Having said that, I would quickly look at issues of priorities quickly. One, we're looking at centralization, which also we can look at it, depending on the way we look at it, it can be a challenge or it can also be a priority. Now, the issue, you have pockets of information. Talk about in terms of bits and pieces of information on biodiversity. The critical issue is that they are not centralized. And therefore, that also becomes a major concern. It's a challenge for us, and that is why it's a priority. And the priority is for us to have a centralized point where we put these pieces of data together. It's easy to walk to one centralized point and pick, data on biodiversity. So that is one key priority area for us. Then final decisions also rest with what we call policy makers. Usually we call them high-level people. But not only with the high-level people, we also have to work with key technical officers at the district level, at the MMDS level, at the national level, to not just hear, understand, but we want them to appreciate the importance of biodiversity. And then let me bring in also, so we have dialoguing sessions and so on with these high-level people, so they can understand and then also facilitate the mainstreaming of biodiversity data. So that's very critical. Then private sector as a key priority area. Ghana prioritizes private sector as the engine of growth. It's very key to us. So in our policy making, in these mainstreaming processes, we are also interested in working actively with the private sector, getting them to understand biodiversity issues and the implications for their business and so on. And one area which I'll be talking about subsequently, perhaps when we go into the discussion area, is how do we enhance private sector interest or investment in biodiversity conservation. It's well developed in Kenya, in the wildlife industry, in the ecotourism industry. And it's also a key priority area that we could look at. The earlier speaker spoke about, we call it traditional medicines or herbal medicines. And it's also very critical. I mean, now our universities have started degree courses in these areas, and they all come from biodiversity. So it's also very, very important. And then I would like to also touch on the extractive industry, not as direct, but because it has a major impact on the destruction of biodiversity, critical to the country. The president has set up a committee that is dealing with that in terms of polluting the waters and biodiversity in the water bodies and the destruction of the forest. So we can have our biodiversity intact. And so basically, generally, if I want to, just to sum up briefly, these are the key areas that we are looking at, and these are the challenges when we talk about biodiversity mainstreaming. Maybe one quick point has to do with capacity development. We need to build capacity on a sustained basis. Sometimes you have one person generating information, and then the person works for long and has to go on leave. Nobody takes over. So I'm talking about the general continuity of mentoring and coaching in these areas of biodiversity, data gathering, and the use of the data. I would pause here so that if there are some questions, then subsequently we can take them up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Winfred. And it was really also to your last point, it's not just that you need this sort of centralized database, but it's also how do you decentralize actually that knowledge internally. So if one person leaves, then all that knowledge is not lost, right? I think it's fascinating. And also just to hear about the complexity of the 50 ministries and agencies that you work with, including the Ministry of Finance, and then really going to the local level that you also have to cooperate with. So a lot of complexity here, and I have a lot of questions that maybe we can get into later on how do you even start coordinating this. So I think, Kira, you wanted to come in with a question. Also, just to our participants, please do come in with your own questions. If you have one, either raise your hand or ask them via the chat function. But Kira, please.
Yeah, thanks, Winfred, for that presentation. It was great. And I really want to come back to this point that you've just spoken about bringing in different stakeholders around, competing needs and competing interests. And in particular, stakeholders like the private sector, who perhaps, biodiversity is not their main priority. And how do you approach, getting their buy-in for protecting biodiversity? What kind of practical steps do you take to secure that buy-in?
Okay. So first of all, if you take the private sector, there's a question that we often talk about private sector. There's a question that we would ask, or private sector would ask, what is in it for me? And we normally have this thing we call Club 100. So they look at the best 100 private sector organizations, and they give them award and so on. Now, if we could put these together, for example, if we take, let's use the hotel industry, for example. If you take Kenya, the hotel industry has invested in wildlife. And if you look at it, it's even private. It's like of their own interest. And it's a kind of business. People follow it and come and invest. There's a place at Taita, they have all the wild animals. It's a hotel. I spent 3 days there. And the point is that if government could have something we call Green Star. Hotels are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 star. Okay, so working with the Ghana Tourism Authority, for example, Ministry of Tourism, you can say, like what you call green labeling, for example. So you can say, if you do A, B, C, D, in terms of you have guidelines, if you invest in so and so, like you invest in endangered turtle species, for example, of this amount, and we're covering this special area, government is going to tag you Green Star. And by the Green Star, it boosts your business. So it's a two-way affair, and I think that government and private sector could sit around the table and discuss this. Sometimes it's not even always what you call tax and fiscal incentives and all that. We could discuss, government, private sector could discuss this, and also the role of civil society organizations. And that would then bring in a substantial investment in biodiversity conservation. Both parties are going to gain. We have a wildlife preserve for us also, and then we also generate investment from it. Not only private sector, but there are some too that we can do with working with the local communities. And once they have interest and they have benefits coming to them, I think that it will go a long way to help all of us. So this is my thinking on it, and it's very practical. We could get it going.
Great, thanks, Winfred. There's a comment coming in from Consolata. Thank you so much, Consolata. So with NEMA, for example, we have a memorandum of understanding that guides are working together. We also have what they call the sector working group, which brings together a number of stakeholders to plan and implement issues agreed on together. Now we have the program approach that allows us to sit on a roundtable for discussion. So that was a question coming in earlier that Consolata you responded to. But it's very much what you also said, Consolata, is you have this program approach where you divide or distribute those responsibilities, and then you also allocate resources accordingly to make sure that those ministries are also, and those agencies are also actually able to implement those programs. So very much related to what we just talked about with this coordination. I had a final question for you. Winfred, you touched on monitoring and evaluation briefly. You mentioned those indicators. Could you just lift the veil in terms of how do you set those indicators? And then also, I mean, how do you monitor them, that success in terms of different planning processes, please?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to state that we don't plan for, we plan with. So it's more of working with the sectors and also with the districts. So we work to them, the Monitoring and Evaluation Division, we'll work with them. First, we have what we call national core indicators. So based on the key priorities of the nation, we have these indicators that monitor at the national level. But beyond that, we also have broad general indicators working with the sector. So we would expect Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources coming up with issues of biodiversity and other key related sectors, Ministry of Environment, coming specific with indicators as pertains to biodiversity, Forestry Commission, and so on. Currently, it's even ongoing. Now we have what we call the annual progress report. So there will be a report on each of these indicators with the baselines. And every year, there's a reporting on it based on data generated until we are able to track the performance of this. The districts are also preparing the annual progress report. So in terms of information, when I talk about centralization, we are also expecting each district to work on issues related to biodiversity at the district level. If there's a particular river, there's a particular biodiversity species and all that. But as I said, there are also challenges in terms of data, funds for gathering data and all that, but gradually we are getting there. So that's how we work on the data system, and we monitor it every year through our annual progress report. Occasionally, one of the challenges that we've had, I would say, is to do with evaluation. But increasingly, we are beginning to have, projects, bits and pieces here and there to also evaluate, and we are able to test the effectiveness and efficiency and all that, the impacts of these projects that we have put in place maybe 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and then we know how to moving forward. So that's essentially how we look at it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Winfried. I guess that also underlines the need that it's not just about having very top level data, but you need to get granular and local data that correspond to those rivers or those smaller ecosystems. So that comes with a lot of challenges, obviously, as well. Thank you so much, Winfried. And we'll come back to you after in the panel discussion. I'd like to move on to our third speaker. So our third speaker is Emmanuel Odame. He's the head of the Field Services Unit at the Directorate of Agricultural Extension Services at the Ministry of Food and Agriculture in Ghana. Emmanuel, the floor is yours, please, and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to you all. I'm making a presentation on behalf of Ministry of Food and Agriculture, Ghana, and I'm a Deputy Director in charge of Field Services Unit of the Directorate of Agricultural Extension Services in Ghana. Can we move on? Okay, so this is my presentation outline. First, we have some bit of introduction and the Ministry of Agriculture current main policy priorities. Then what demand does the ministry have for biodiversity information? The last but not the least, the challenges in assessing biodiversity information. We've got to the introduction. Ghana, like any other developing countries, West Africa, is basically agrarian country, and the sector contributes to the economy of Ghana in terms of employment. We have for now 44%. We'll talk about foreign exchange and contribution to the national gross domestic product, also source of food and raw materials for our industries. When we're talking about the mandate we are, the ministry is supposed to develop and execute policies, programs and strategy policies by the government, programs and strategies for the agricultural sector within the context of a coordinated national socio-economic growth and development agenda. Meaning the ministry is not only doing it alone, but also coordinate activities with the Ministry for local government, the rural development, and decentralization, Ministry of Trade, and others to enhance socio-economic growth and development agenda of the government. With regard to our mission, we are talking about promoting sustainable agriculture. With this, we have to, how best can we protect the biodiversity and also at the same time increase productivity and make a living out of that. And thriving agribusiness, meaning here too, we are dealing with the private sector, where the government, the public sector is mostly for the dissemination of agricultural information and other standard. Agribusiness will be for the private sector to undertake. Then through that, we are also through research and technology development with effective extension services and other support services to producers, processors, distributors, and consumers for improved food security, nutrition, and then the incomes that the actors in the agricultural value chain will have, and also to improve their livelihood. So currently, the government have its own policy priorities, and here we are talking about one policy the government is implementing as a flagship program is the Planting for Food and Jobs policy of the government, and it has 5 implementation modules. And this includes the food crop sector, where farmers are motivated to use input which have been subsidized 50%, especially the seed, the fertilizers, and also output marketing. The government also creating the environment for them also to buy their produce, so as to ensure that at the end of the day, it will also create employment opportunities along the agricultural value chain. For the crop crops, we are talking about maize, rice, sorghum, millet, root and tuber crops like cassava, sweet potato, cocoyam and taro. We also have vegetables and legumes like sorghum, legumes like soya bean, granules, and the rest. The second module also touched on planting for export and rural development. With this, we realize that most of the forest cover are being taken away by other food crop production. And for that matter, how can the government make sure you protect the environment? And also, how can the government diversify the economy of our farmers so that in a way it will create other forms of revenue for our farmers? And to that effect, the government has, through the Ministry of Food and Agriculture and the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development and Decentralization, are implementing this activity also to earn foreign exchange for the country. And in addition to cocoa, Ghana is the #2 exporter of cocoa. And for that matter, we want to diversify and have more tree crop production so that we can increase our foreign exchange community to enhance our economic and social development in the country. So based on that, we are also through discussions with the district assemblies, the ministry discuss this with the district so that with tree crop that they have comparative advantage, that what they want, they will select and also come out for us to assist the government of system to produce those tree crops. So we are having cashew, we are having cotton, we are having oil palm, we are having coconut, we are having citrus, we are having mango, coffee, and shea. And fact is, the government is bearing the cost of producing the seedlings and is giving it to the farmers for free. So the farmers will have the opportunity to maintain their farms with these tree crops, and when it's due for harvesting, then they will make a living after that. Even there are situations where with Forestry Commission, we have a system called Tonja system, where the farmers will be taxed to produce tree crops, but they have to mix it with food crops so that the food crops will maintain them. And by the time that they are old, the trees are old enough, then they can benefit from the tree crops that they have cultivated. Again, we are having greenhouse technology villages. These are villages that the government is using to train the youth, especially the youth, so that what a lot of them are passed out, they are in the system, they don't have employment, but this is an area the government think it will best serve the interest of the youth, so that at the end of the day, when they are trained, even we're also hitherto we're doing this with the government of Israel, and some of them will have the opportunity to travel to Israel, where they will work and make a living. And when they come back, they can together invest in this green house technology. So we are having this in 3 areas: one in the southern part, one in the northern part. The southern part is the Dawian one. Then the central part, the one in the borders is the central part, and the northern part is Akumadan, so that it will best serve the interest of the youth in those catchment areas. Another area that the government also having priority on is rearing for food and jobs. We realize livestock production is on the downside. So the government also investing in that area to make sure when we are talking about nutrition, it's not only food crops. So how can we blend food crops and livestock to have good, healthy, and population? So here, the government also providing livestock farmers with small ruminants like what we call the sheep and goats. Then we have some also who are having pigs. Others are having cockroaches and guinea fowls. This is being done to ensure that we increase breeding stock, and also the system also will help them have access to quality feed and nutrition for the animals, and also to with the assistance of the extension staff and the veterinary staff, then they can provide a good animal health and programs for the farmers, livestock farmers. Then marketing, the government also creating an environment for them to market their products to ensure that at the end of the day, you have it, you produce it, and there's a market where consumers will patronize your goods, and for that matter, also improve your livelihood. Then last but not least is agricultural mechanization service, which we call AMSEC. Here, the government through the private sector. It's not, the government is helping to import portable agricultural machinery. And these machinery have been subsidized, some 40%, some 60%, so that the private sector or farmers who have the money can buy them and use them to help their work. And if they can do that, maybe the private sector can form a group, they can mobilize themselves and purchase all these portable agricultural machinery equipment so that they will service the farmers at a fee in their catchment area. And for that matter, the government is strengthening almost 92 of them widespread in the country. The next, that's right. So what demand does MOFA have for biodiversity information? There's a need, therefore, for information on the impact of agriculture on the ecosystem status of the environment. Yes, we can do agriculture, but if you are not careful, in an environment where people are doing crop extensification, meaning they have to use a lot of hectareage to produce food, what will be the impact of that? And the government don't want it that way, and for that matter, the government want the system to have crop intensification, whereby the same plot of land, maybe you have your 5 acres, and that 5 acres with all the agricultural, before the good agricultural practices, then you can make something out of your 5 hectares than cultivating maybe 20 and then destroying the environment. And also the information also needed will help in preventing activities that will impact negatively on the environment. There are situations where people are cropping close by water bodies of water, and here pesticides will contaminate fertilizer, also will contaminate these water bodies, and it will affect the biodiversity in these water bodies. So with the information also needed to help ensure that at the end of the day, we protect the environment, because there are some who are even willing even to encroach on the protected areas like the forest reserves, because they think they don't have the land, and how can they say without doing anything? So they want to encroach the forest reserve. But the government is trying its best to make sure we protect these habitat areas so that we can have a good biodiversity program in the country. Then the information is also required include information on protected areas. For now, as a country, the last time I heard about information on it, we are having almost 1 million forest reserves. Hitherto, it was more than that. But because of illegal mining, we are destroying our water bodies, we are destroying the land. And here again, we heard about the crop-wide varieties. I quite remember last week, I read a news item where they said they've discovered a new frog in our Etiwa Range Forest Reserve. And it has been named Konkura Sejimasi. Sejimasi is the local community. And because they have been cooperating with the researchers, they have been named, the new frog has their name as part of them. And these are the areas we need to protect. Other than that, it's a difficult thing for us, and also like the crop-wide relatives, available water sources. Now in our country, Ghana, most of our water bodies have been destroyed by these illegal mining people. But maybe you have to touch on what the government is doing in regard to that. Yes, the government have taken a bold initiative to do something about it. Then we are talking about the breeding seasons of wildlife, because in Ghana, for fish now we have a system in place where between July and August, 1 month, they don't allow the fisher pool to fish or harvest fish from the sea, so that to ensure that at the end of the day, the fish will have a breeding season and come out with matured and more fish for the country. And that also go for antelopes, grasshoppers, and what have you, monkeys. And this is something that we need information on to guard against and protect our country for sustenance, because we are talking about sustainable agriculture. So that at the end of the day, it will be like we are destroying for today and living tomorrow for all those who have not been born. Yeah, the next. So the challenges in assessing. Please, the previous slide. The challenges that we are facing. The one is the difficulty in assessing biodiversity information by policy planners, because they are scattered in various institutions. As my colleague was indicated, we will need a centralized system. But the key point is, even having a centralized system there's a difficulty in that. There's a challenge in that. And once you are not having the information essential from, and they are scattered, like we have the academia have their own, how are you going to relate to them to have the information? Research institutes are having theirs, how are you going to relate to having them? And because of that, once there's a difficulty, then you won't have the information for you to work on. Then policy planners are not usually aware about the existence of biodiversity information. There are a certain category of people who are not. Yes, we talk about it in the country, but there are some, because of the technicalities involved and what have you, how to understand what you're talking about, these issues regard to the biodiversity data and what have you. People find it difficult, and for that matter, maybe they will shy away from it because they can't, like the third bullet we say, they can't understand, it's time consuming to digest, and if we based on that, then they will shy away from that. Then, last but not least, they are not well packaged to influence policy. And I'm believing once we have the Connect project, Ghana, they are trying their best to arrest the situation to make sure at the end of the day we can address it and help the system mainstream biodiversity information in the country. Based on all, I say thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Amen, and thank you so much, Emmanuel. I mean, a lot to touch on there, but I especially loved your anecdote about the new frog, and I think it really comes down to, I mean, you need to know that this frog is there. It's really about that knowledge, but also linked to that data to be able to, so you're actually able to protect, in this case, a very unique species in Ghana. I had a question though. You mentioned your last point that sometimes biodiversity data can be difficult to understand. It's not well packaged to really suit the needs of policymakers and policy planners, for example. Do you have any thoughts on, you know, what are the best practices? How can you take biodiversity data in some cases and be in a better position to explain it to some of your fellow colleagues? Any thoughts there? For the other participants, again, if you have any questions for Emmanuel, please do ask them in the chat. But Emmanuel, your thoughts on that question, any ideas?
Thank you very much, Stephen. Now, one issue that I want to touch on is the capacity building for various policymakers. We can't have it for maybe, for example, the chief directors and maybe the minister. You can't sit them down for maybe 3 hours or maybe 2 days for certain activity. But like Winfred was saying, the technical people, we need to build their capacity in terms of the technicalities and the standards and what have you. So that at the end of the day, when we have grip of those information, then we can work on. Then one issue is sustained dialogue. The issue is not one-time dialogue, but how can we continuously dialogue to make sure, because like you harp on an issue, that will make sure people mind will come up. But if you say once and that's the end of the story, you can't expect them to practice it. So how can we sustainably have a dialogue to exchange experience and data and what have you? Then again, I like to say, if you're supposed to have, can we organize maybe study tours for these policymakers to be apprised and with the situation on the field, and also for experiential learning. I can't remember when the ministry started this in 2017 with this Funding for Food and Jobs. We realized that there was a 4 armyworm infestation, which was these creatures were destroying all the maize plants that we are having in most of the regions. The ministry liaised with NADBO. The ministry informed the presidency. The ministry informed research institutes, and together, this institution came up and they went to the field, assess the situation, and the researchers have now come out with programs that will help us best address this issue. So per se, we need to organize this territory for them, to have a feel of what is happening. And when we are talking about it, then they will appreciate it. It won't be like a bookwork, but once they've seen it and they see how best can we help research the country, then they can do that. Then also, one issue I also want to touch on is the production of video document to create awareness on that. Pictures don't tell lies. They see the destructive nature of our forests. They see how our waters have been turned to like a coffee, or maybe, I don't know, in Ghana, we have Milo, like Milo for people to drink. The color is brown. But if we have documented to show the effect, the impact of all these things from mining and what have you, people appreciate, then why are we doing this to ourselves? Because this is our own water body that we will drink today and forever. And if today we are destroying it, what will be the impact for tomorrow? So if it's possible, we can have a video document and showcase on national television or what have you. It also help go a long way to help in the biodiversity issue. Then the last but not least, like coordination among policymakers, which
Emmanuel, I think you have a slowdown in the connection. Maybe you can switch off your video so we can just hear you better, because now I think you're breaking up.
We've had touch on when you speak.
Emmanuel, I think you're back. Please go for it. Sorry.
Is it okay, please?
Yes, yeah. It's good. You're back. Go for it.
That's right. So that's my take for that.
Could you repeat your last point? You were talking about coordination with policymakers.
Yeah, I was saying,
it was got lost.
Like my senior man Rainford Nelson touched on that, we need effective coordination. Not just coordinate, but we coordinate and make impact. We coordinate and make positive, come out with positive outcomes. So at the end of the day, more so like he was saying, if we have that coordination, then the onus will be on us to make sure if we are not practicing it, we have to practice because it's something that the system demands it. But if you don't do that, it will affect us.
I think also similarly, Winfred, you raised a point about the need to bring in and get buy-in from those both high-level decision makers, but also the technical officers. Otherwise, so across those levels, otherwise you're in trouble in the long term. Emmanuel, thank you so much. I'd like to move on to the next speaker, and just a final quick reaction also to your point about those study tours. It's one thing to show data to policymakers, which can sometimes be relatively abstract. But if you want to Winfred's point, also have them appreciate and understand the data, then perhaps one of the most effective tools really is to take them to those ecosystems, and so they can see the richness of biodiversity in real life. So I think that's an excellent point. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. I'd like to move on to the next speaker. And we have with us Leah Wanambwa Nice. She's Senior Policy Officer at the Directorate of Sustainable Environment and Blue Economy of the African Union Commission. Leah, are you there? And please, if so, the floor is yours. Go for it. Leah, are you with us? Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you loud and clear, please.
Okay, and in case of any interruptions, just forgive me, I'm taking this from the house with the kids around. Okay.
Go for it, Leah, please.
Okay, just a second. So basically, from the AU perspectives, our priorities are covered under the umbrella of the AU Agenda 2063. And we have a goal there, which is called the Goal for an Environmentally Sustainable Climate and Resilient Economies and Communities, that aim to put in place measures to sustainably manage the continent's rich biodiversity, forests, land, waters, and using mainly adaptive measures to address climate risks. So from the Agenda 2063, this was adopted back in 2013 to mark the 50th anniversary of the African Union and to project the next 50 years for the continent. That's where the Agenda 2063 comes from. So we have biodiversity and climate put in one particular goal. We also draw from the UN Sustainable Goal 15, as the AU member states are also members of the UN. And of course, Goal 15 is aiming to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, etc. So as a continent, of course, and the Commission, we remain committed to protecting biodiversity and ecosystems from further destruction. And in line with the upcoming COP15, of course, we are committed to securing a post-2020 global framework that will reduce and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. So how are we going around this? Of course, we are working very closely with the African group of negotiators on biodiversity as they prepare for the COP. And we feel that this is one entry point where we can work at a continent level to support the ongoing efforts by the different countries and also to have a more coordinated and harmonized approach towards the COP. We also do the same, of course, for other conventions like the UNEP-WCMC and the desertification one, the UNCCD. Mainly there, we try to enhance the capacity of the African group of negotiators. We call them the AGN. We facilitate their preparatory meetings and coordination meetings. This is not just being done by the AU, but also with a lot of support from partners, including UNEP and other organizations. We also organize seminars and workshops to cover some of the thematic areas that member states would need to know. And also providing the technical backstopping in general. Going now to the second issue, which is on policy demand. From the work we've been doing over the past few years, we've seen a great need for supporting the monitoring and reporting, not just for the implementation at the national level. I believe those are easier to manage since it's uniform at the national level. But we do have at the continental level and the regional levels and sub-regional, the need to have a more harmonized reporting framework. So we don't have countries trying to do reports for different sets of organizations and institutions. You'll find the same country trying to do reports for maybe a particular donor that's funding one aspect of biodiversity or development. Then we have our continental frameworks where we are also requiring the AU countries to report to the AU on how they're implementing the policies. And at the same time, these countries have regional obligations. Maybe they're at the regional level, we have institutions such as ECOWAS, SADC, etc., East Africa Community. So there has been a challenge on harmonizing because it's still the same topic, wildlife, biodiversity, or even climate, with different agreements that countries have an obligation to report to. So there is the monitoring and reporting. We have started a little bit for some of the AU programs because we've been dishing out so many policies and recommendations. Every year we have a summit and new decisions are adopted, but we've not been very good at tracking and following implementation of those decisions. And that's where the real work is. Otherwise, it just remains on paper for most of the decisions and also for some of the agreements that we sign at the international level. We also, on the nature conservation side, the policy framework and decision-making processes undervalue the true cost of nature and biodiversity. And they are, of course, the indirect contribution to the GDP, etc. So on this, we are working to support countries to mainstream natural capital accounting in policy and decision-making processes. It's quite new. Work started back in 2013, then it stalled. And now we are kind of coming back with some partners. We've joined this natural capital community of practice group, which is working with member states to try and bring out a more harmonized and more mainstreaming into the decision-making processes, because if you don't know the value, then it's a little bit difficult to convince our policymakers to protect some of these resources. The other is mainly linked on to the work being done by the African group of negotiators, and that is to support the implementation of the post-2020 framework once it's adopted. Because right now we're in a big rush to get this post-2020 framework for biodiversity adopted. But what happens really after that is countries have to go back and sit and report that this is what we have. And the challenge usually comes now. How do we implement? Or they wait until it's too late and it's soon time to get another framework, and not much has been done under the first one. I will also give an example of course, the Paris Agreement on climate change. Of course, we have this beautiful agreement and the NDCs, but when it comes to implementation, we realize most of them are conditional NDCs, and countries are facing challenges to implement this. And so as we prepare for this adoption of the post-2020 framework for biodiversity, at the Commission, we'll try to see how we can already start now to see how to plan to support countries in the implementation part of this. Mainly, it's tied along many different challenges, financial needs, capacity, and also competing priorities. Another demand is also for the youth, the space for the youth to contribute to these processes. So we've started to work to form a continental group for youth working on the different parts of biodiversity and wildlife as well, and to see how their voices could be amplified. Or after all, these natural resources belong to them. They are the future. By the time they get there, they want to be sure that they still have the nature and biodiversity we're able to enjoy during our time. So we've started engagement with the youth and hope that this will pick momentum, not just for biodiversity, but also for wildlife conservation, and also their contribution to processes such as CITES. And now move to the barriers to some of these challenges. The key one is the cross-cutting nature of these multilateral environmental agreements. We have different negotiation teams in the different countries. We have one group working on biodiversity, another working on climate change, others working on the desertification component. They each go so they all go and negotiate in parallel different processes, which sometimes may be contradicting to what was adopted maybe on climate issues. So I'm looking at the issue of nature-based solutions in as much as it's a CBD having some components on the climate change. So when these are not harmonized, it will be difficult to implement. I'm not sure if you can still hear me. It says my internet is unstable.
We can hear you, Leah. I think it perhaps best that you shut off your video just for a sec, but otherwise I think there was a small glitch where we could still hear you. So please just continue, go for it.
Okay, thank you. We also have the means of implementation, which is usually a challenge. We are looking at finance, as I mentioned earlier, capacity and technology. And I'm going to add, I think, what one of the previous speakers talked about, the scientific part of it. Sometimes the science is not, we do not have, most countries do not have their own trained scientists on some of these perspectives or thematic areas under nature and biodiversity, etc. Meaning we are depending a lot on outside science, which could sometimes not too much welcome at the national levels. Sometimes it's very much welcome, but of course it would go a really long way if some of the things we are doing are actually based on scientific research and studied by our own governments and academic institutions. There is the issue of sovereignty of member states, and this is a challenge which at the African Union we face. Member states are sovereign. For some of the other conventions or other areas, sectors which are not directly linked to natural resources, it's easier to get these decisions passed. But when it comes to conservation, countries may want to exploit their natural resources to be able to reach the economic development that other countries are at. And telling them, no, you need to conserve these resources might be a bit of a challenge, especially if the Commission or regional organizations do not have mandate on those natural resources. So it ends up being that the countries have to determine how they see fit to utilize these resources. Some may be sustainable, some may be unsustainable. But at the end of the day, it also has to come with a balance between the current government in power, etc. But at the end of the day, these are sovereign states, and they do have that space to decide what happens to their natural resources. Another challenge is, of course, balancing the needs, which is very closely linked to the sovereignty of member states, balancing basic needs and economic development. Right now, we have the COVID pandemic, COVID-19 crisis, which has impacted a lot on especially biodiversity and eco-based tourism. A speaker referred to Kenya, for example, as one of these areas, countries which have made a bit of success in the tourism sector. But of course, these sectors depend on resources from tourism. So with the lockdowns and no tourists, it means that the resources which usually come to support these wildlife conservation areas are no longer there. And this, of course, this is putting a bit of it's a challenge, not just for the natural resources, but also the communities which depend on these wildlife resources for their livelihoods. So of course, governments are working to see how to overcome this challenge, and with support of partners, etc. There is some effort to maintain almost this, if you call it the status quo, to maintain these resources going to communities, but much of the resources is coming from partners and donor organizations, just to keep at least the rangers going while we wait for the pandemic. From the AU side, we have during 2020 and now 2021 developed an AU Green Recovery Action Plan. This action plan has 5 pillars. The first one is on climate finance, and it's recovery from COVID-19. So the first one is on climate finance, the second is on renewable energy, the third is on nature-based solutions and biodiversity, the fourth is on resilient agriculture, and the fifth one is on green and resilient cities with components of technology and water. So with this action plan, actually, it's going to be launched on 15th of July, so on Thursday, and we are hoping that it will unlock some of the resources needed to recover in a green way, ethic and blue, from COVID. And then, like I said, the pillar which has attracted most attention and resources has been the pillar on nature-based solutions and biodiversity. So we hope to see how that goes. Following Thursday, I'm happy to send out the invitation to all. We have the threat from unsustainable extraction of resources, from illegal exploitation and illegal trade in wild fauna and flora. This, of course, has been an ongoing challenge. Addressing these needs so many policy interventions, but also a lot of, if you will, demand a willingness by countries to also enforce some of the the laws are there, but the enforcement is what is the challenge. And a bit of course, there's corruption that comes into play when it comes to the illegal part of the trade in fauna and flora. For this, the AU has, of course, a continental strategy on wildlife, which we have been working with countries and now trying to roll out the monitoring and reporting framework for this particular strategy. Then we have climate change, of course, which is impacting our biodiversity, and addressing climate change, again, depends on so many other factors, depending on biodiversity itself, which would be a solution to climate change, but also climate change impacting the biodiversity through different methods. So part of the resilience programs we are having are aimed at addressing this particular challenge. We are also working to finalize our continental strategy on climate change. It's coming in a bit too late, considering countries already have their NDCs adopted. So we are working to towards that, we are having regional consultations on the climate change strategy. And lastly, we have the growing human population, which is increasing and reducing the spaces for nature. Mainly it's to expand for agriculture, infrastructure development, and some of these can be controlled. Some of it, they're not so easy to convince governments to shift. And so this is what keeps us awake at the AUC. And with that, I would like to hand it back over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. And I think, to use one of Emmanuel's wordings as well, it's really about the need for the sustained dialogue. It's not just that you have a COP and agreement, but then it's also about what happens afterwards, and looking at the implementation of it. And then also what I really want to touch on with you is this monitoring and reporting that you indicated was a particular challenge from your perspective, so both at a continental level, but also looking at different regions and sub-regional levels, and if there's a need for a more harmonized reporting. I was just wondering, could you give us a flavor in terms of how do you bring those different reporting standards together, those different ways of reporting, and how do you respect then the way in that different regions might be doing things, and what's the end goal there? Is full harmonization, is that the end goal? Or so how do you respect those differences there? Any quick reactions from your side there?
I think the main role for the African Union is policy harmonization and coordination. So of course, this would be extremely perfect and a good deal if we had a more harmonized policies and reporting for the different aspects, be it on biodiversity, development, economic, etc. But of course, there's 55 countries, and different countries are at different levels of implementation on different things. Some don't, some do it. But also we have the different regions are very different in terms of priorities and the kind of environment they have. Some are more forests, some are more deserts. So, I would take the example of the wildlife strategy, which is a continental framework. So ideally, the countries would take that strategy and create, and I think there's this beautiful term that we use, domesticate it. So align it to the regional priorities. So the continental frameworks are mainly broad, and then the countries customize them to their different needs or to their specific regions. And then with that, at the regional level. And the countries, once they do that, I believe for the ECOWAS one, for example, is more aligned to the AU since it was developed after the AU wildlife strategy. So as they collect reports for ECOWAS, it should be in such a way that it's also reporting to the AU. So they don't have to. So the way it was designed, the monitoring tool, is we studied all the existing frameworks on wildlife, the strategies, either for those who the regional ones anyway, and then the bigger ones like the EU wildlife strategy for Africa. The US also has some kind of strategy they have. So it studied the regional ones and then took the AU one and the 2 or 3 partner organization strategies and tried to map out what was common in all the strategies, and then picked out common indicators. And that's how we developed the monitoring tool. So, but then we've also ticked which ones are missing and which ones are more in one area or another. But we've designed it in such a way that when countries are reporting at the REC level, they do not have to create a separate process to report to the AU, and it will just be the same one, only that it will be lacking or some elements which are more maybe national focus, etc. This has not been sent to the countries yet, but it was validated at the last workshop. So we are hoping to roll it out, and we'll see how this goes, but it will be one way to ensure there's harmonization and collective reporting. We, in the past, had one for water as well. It's been a while since we reported on water, but countries were doing self-assessments on water and sanitation. And then this would go to the AU summit and with a ranking, unfortunately. So the best countries and the least performing countries, it all brings a lot of anxiety and a little bit of tension, of course. But at the end of the day, it really pushes countries to do better. So we do have one for agriculture as well, which is done every 2 years and reported to the AU Summit. And the beauty of it is that countries get to know what other countries are doing, and then they get challenged to do better, especially when the issue of the numbers come in, where country X is said to have done so well in maybe the agriculture component on trade and not so well in the fertilizers or something. They have different indicators, but it really helps countries to implement and motivate them to do better in the next ones, and also to allocate budgets to some of these sectors. But the end game would be to harmonize and be able to move together as a continent. Yeah. And also to reduce the burden of reporting to the countries, because really some sit and do reports all day for different kinds of actors.
Yeah. Thank you, Leah. I think the wildlife strategy is a beautiful example of how you have this agility and flexibility in not just setting the framework, but also when it comes to the implementation and the reporting as well. So thank you so much. I'd like to move on to our final commentator, just to get an idea of also just what we get a comment on what we've heard in this session. And also just to introduce a bit in terms of what the Connect project has been working on, some of the work that has been done. So I'd like to bring in Abisha from UNEP-WCMC. So he is program officer at UNEP-WCMC, but also a biodiversity mainstreaming specialist who's been following the Connect project for a very long time. Hi, Abisha, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Stefan.
Perfect.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm very good, yeah. Thank you very much. I've been really listening attentively to really interesting presentations from all the excellent speakers that we have. So maybe just to
Abisha, if I may, so I think before we get started, could you just give us a quick crash intro on the Connect project? And we've heard this concept of biodiversity information products before. Could you just explain those? And then, of course, continue from there. Please, Abisha.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe before I actually explain what these biodiversity information products are, I think it's better to sort of really briefly mention the philosophy of the Connect project itself, which makes it actually unique. So there are 3 key components that are part of the Connect project that we're trying to address as part of this initiative. Component 1, which is the demand side of biodiversity information and data, and component 2, which is the supply side of biodiversity information and data, and then how to sustain that. So what I mean by that, by demand, we actually set out to help the 3 countries that we're working with to try to clearly understand the in-country demands for biodiversity information and some of the barriers actually for using that biodiversity information within government decision-making processes. And of course, including to clarify what sort of format, timing, and packaging is required for that biodiversity information data so that it can be useful to influence the decision-making processes in the 3 countries. The supply side focus more on actually sort of identify where is that biodiversity information data is, so that we could actually help countries to mobilize and repackage that biodiversity data and information from a range of sources, either national or international, to meet a number of the demands that the countries had actually identified through the context analysis process that they did. And after identifying where the supply is, the 3rd component is now how to actually sort of sustain that process so that information can actually be embedded and integrated into national development system. So strengthening the connection between government decision makers, biodiversity and ecosystem service data providers, and then to sustainably provide policy relevant and, where possible, spatially explicit information to meet those ongoing national demands for biodiversity information. So the end product was really the biodiversity information products that respond to the clear demands that were identified by the countries. So this could have been maps. For example, in Uganda, they actually focused on, they did like spatial biodiversity assessment maps, which focused on themes related to ecosystem classification, pressures on biodiversity, protected areas, the threat status and protection level of ecosystems, and then carried out sort of an initial analysis of priority biodiversity hotspots that agriculture can actually avoid, as Madam Kon articulated in their presentation. In Ghana, for example, they actually focused on trying to generate new headline indicators for assessing the state of Ghana's biodiversity. So these were mainly ecosystem threat status and ecosystem protection level indicators. And all that information in Ghana actually feeds into and links with policy related to Ghana's sustainable development goals. There's another speaker, I think it was Winfred who mentioned it. The state of environment reporting, their national biodiversity strategy and action plan, and also their climate change action plan. So it was really what really made it unique. This Connect project is trying to address those three components. That where is the demand for biodiversity information data, and in what format is that data required? Then once we know where the demand is, decide on where the supply of data is, who actually have got that data and information, and then try to develop those sort of biodiversity information that respond to the demand. I think that's overall, that's the Connect philosophy.
Thanks, Abisha. I guess I had sort of a follow-up question here, which is, what are some of those key learnings? I mean, again, the Connect project, all the key national partners that actually have been developing and co-creating those biodiversity information products in the different countries. But on a more general level, what are the sort of key learnings for you in developing these biodiversity information products on the one hand, but also coordinating and sort of supporting that process from your perspective? Any ideas there?
I think the key learnings that really emerge is that mainstreaming biodiversity can actually be a complex process, and that there's no kind of standardized method to go about it. I think that's one of the key things that actually came out, and I'm sure countries would agree with that. Another thing is that also the approach is actually that we've taken, and the tools that you use for mainstreaming depend on context. So there's actually need to sort of adapt and, those methods and tools to the context in which you're applying them. So this could, because it uses a wide range of tools like information resources, decision support tools. I've mentioned about maps, online tools, and a bit of communication, reaching out to other stakeholders, the whole idea of cross-sectoral collaboration. So that's another thing. Another important thing is one thing that I would say we learn is that it's actually a long-term process, and achieving actual biodiversity impacts may only occur maybe after years of dedicated sort of mainstreaming. In fact, it's almost impossible to reach this point within the time frame of a single project. So I always argue that it's more useful to think of mainstreaming as an incremental process and then break it down into small achievable stepping stones. And along that way, you could actually find quite a lot of really success stories or benefits of mainstreaming along that chain. But it's such a really long-term process. I mean, it's a proven fact, even from examples from countries that are streets ahead of many countries in the world, like South Africa, Costa Rica, who have been working on this for quite a long time. So it's quite clear. And of course, it's really a dynamic also and opportunistic process. It doesn't always proceed in a linear way. So you might actually identify a particular entry point to influence maybe at the beginning of the project, but these entry points, they mutate and evolve along the way, and also some new entry points emerge. So it is really critical, especially to the country teams and the global team that is supporting, to have that kind of entrepreneurial approach to be able to spot some of these new entry points that may emerge and try to make the most of the spatial biodiversity information products or biodiversity information product that would have been developed. And I think another important thing as well that I would say a key is the sustain pillar, which I mentioned in mainstreaming. That is really critical. So one thing that we've actually been encouraging is to approach mainstreaming itself and developing of the biodiversity information products, as an iterative process. They are iterative by nature. So in other ways, so that the biodiversity information products are actually designed for iterative, improvement, something that can actually be sustained, that can be repeatable, simple, that can be a powerful tool for communication, and that can be also used. And I think another key thing as well that is emerging is the importance of having some kind of a workflow or a plan behind the biodiversity, the biodiversity information products, just to make sure that if new mainstreaming opportunities or mainstreaming avenues and venues actually emerge, then you can adapt or refine some of these biodiversity information products so that they can inform those decision-making processes. Then there's also an element of another key lesson. It's really important to get an institution that can act as a custodian of these biodiversity information products. So to really identify an institution that can take the work forward beyond the life of the project. I think that is really critical. An institution, as I said earlier on, that can actually help with updating, refining, adapting, and tailoring, because mainstreaming is a never-ending process, really. Because as new information becomes available, as the environment changes, new technology, you're always going to need to actually respond to those changes and update those products and inform those emerging mainstreaming entry points that may actually emerge. And another thing I think, especially looking at what happened in Ghana, is the importance of engagement at subnational level. It's something which I think Ghana actually did. I think it's their land use, one of their land use and spatial planning agency, who actually have employed some of these biodiversity information products to inform the structure plan for petroleum, for their petroleum hub in Ghana, and also in marine spatial planning for districts in the Western region. And they actually plans to sort of include what they call MMDAs. I think Winfred or Emmanuel mentioned this. I think they are Metropolitan Municipal and District Assembly, so that at that level, subnational level, these biodiversity information products can actually be used. And we all know that change happens at local level, and actually targeting such local level, it increases the chance of having a huge impact in terms of how these BIPs can influence decision-making processes. And there are also some other things, like really making sure you make it visible that there are these products that can be used, selling the product itself, and how they can actually make other people's lives at work easier, how they can actually make their jobs easier. So I think it's important to have champions or people who can provide sort of leadership and energy on those issues in different ministries to say, look, there are actually these tools that can actually help us in improving the way we make our decisions, whether it's at national level or at subnational level. I would say these are some of the key, lessons learned. I think that came out of, that I would say are emerging from the whole Connect process.
Thanks so much, Abishan. I'm also just very, very conscious of time. We only have a few minutes to spare. There was a question from Kira, if some of the national Connect partners could come in with their perspectives, how they found the process of developing these very specific biodiversity information products. So if anyone wants to come in, you can please do raise your hand or just take the floor. I'm just giving this a minute. I think otherwise also we need to get to the wrap up as well. What I'd like to do from each speaker is just to get a conclusion or a key learning in 1 minute from this particular session. And perhaps Consolata, if I could get your perspective on, because you have been using these biodiversity information products and you've referred to them, what was your experience and where do you see the main points for improvements going forward? And could you include that in your wrap up or your conclusory notes, please, Consolata?
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, please.
Yes, it's good to be back. Abisa, I'm happy to see you. It's been quite a while. So thank you so much. In conclusion, I think what I need to bring forward first is I have to mention a few things on monitoring that I heard my sister talking about. I think that is also one of a very important issue that if countries look into can help us in implementation of the biodiversity information product. One thing that happens majorly is that when finance, because for the National Planning Authority is under Ministry of Finance. So when finance put in place issues for monitoring, then all the other sectors automatically comply. So if finance, our Ministry of Finance could take this up and they add them under the monitoring, under the issues to be monitored, then whether we like it or not, this has to be done because you know well that at the end of the financial year, somebody's coming to check your record on what you will have done on this particular item. So this would be some of the issues that we need to undertake to ensure that biodiversity information product that is being produced is actually not gone to waste, but implemented at all different levels, local government, central government, as well as with the non-state actors. So even as I conclude, I think my major concern here will be on strengthening sensitization. Because once we do this, and once all the stakeholders are aware and they know what they have to do, I can assure you that will not go wrong because they will know how implementation has to be done, how the planning can also be undertaken. It's really paramount. It's quite important. I was telling you that Uganda is probably one of the first countries to come up with the herbal medicine for COVID. We have 2 universities that have come up strong with their herbal medicine and they're all working well. We can target on this, turn it around and say, if we have destroyed all these other herbal plants, where were we going to get all this from? You know, and there are many others that we've destroyed them already. But I still think something can be done. We can make a difference. I know also well that at East African level, we have, they have prioritized issues of biodiversity. They're looking at sustaining the utilization of natural resources. And that is where we have the conservation of enhanced value addition of our natural resources comes in. The biodiversity is looked at there. We have our National Agricultural Research organizations focusing specifically on enhancing conservation, enhancement of genetic resources through protection, preservation, and conservation of these genetic resources. You know, all this helps to strengthen our biodiversity. So really, as an agricultural sector, I think we've not gone astray. I believe we are within. And I believe that once the product is worked on and completed, and we take it out to all the different stakeholders, then indeed we are on the right track. But as I was also mentioning the other day, the Connect project has been a wonderful project. It's been a wonderful project. Wonderful in such a way that they picked, for example, with us, they picked Ministry of Agriculture as an implementing ministry. And I was happy with what they did. So the production of the biodiversity product is not complete yet. We're about to finish that. And as they finished, what will you guys say after that? So I want to throw back this piece to you, that probably if it were possible, would have the project continue probably for another 3 years or so. And then look at the implementation, this product that has been produced. How is it being implemented? You don't want to see the result of the work you've done. How are you going to say, oh yes, we did this and we monitored the work and stopped at this level? So I also throw back to you to relook at what you are trying to give us. Why don't we work together for the next period of time to see how the implementation starts? You've produced it. How sure are you that we are going to actually do it well? Let's start together. And then by the time you leave, we are walking and, moving on our own. But you'll also be happy that, oh yes, we have seen result of our work. So that is the bit that I also have to give you. You can rethink about it. You may say, oh, we've done it, we produced the results, and that is what it is. But I want to throw that to you. Think about it. We'll be happy to receive you for the next, I think that will be phase 2. So thank you, Stefan. We are looking forward for the phase 2 implementation. And I'm grateful to all the team. Thank you very much. I probably will be running after this, running off, but I'm grateful to meet all of you. For my colleagues from Ghana, thank you very much. And you, all the team, I'm grateful to meet all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Consolata. And thank you for your time. And we'll of course catch up bilaterally as well. I will have someone from the project just to comment on your earlier point. But if you have to run, then of course, I'm very conscious that we're going a bit over time, so my apologies there. If I could have Winfred, could you give us a quick wrap-up conclusion in 1 minute, max 2, please?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Stefan. I think what I'd like to bring on board is the need for exit and our sustainability strategy, and that ensures continuity. And I tend to agree with Abisha. We have to look at development coordination in what we have produced, the high level, and bringing in Ministry of Finance to look at the funding issues, and then encouraging the private sector, which can bring in jobs in several areas: agri, research, ecotourism, pharmaceuticals, and finally building capacity. On this, that will also ensure the sustainability. So let's focus and reflect on the sustainability strategy. In other words, taking this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Winfred, and thanks again for your time. Emmanuel, could we have your recap and your learnings from this session, please, Emmanuel? Emmanuel, I think you're still on mute. Thank
you very much, Stephen. I'm most grateful to be part of this process. And one thing I like to say is that, like Abisha said, we can start small programs or activities and measure how best we've achieved our success story based on what we've done with those small activities. Like in Ghana, there's a women farmer group, and they are into protecting the mangroves at the Densu estuary. It was destroyed, but this farmer group, these women groups are doing their best, and now they are harvesting a lot of, I forget the name, a lot of things there, and it's protecting the environment. So if they say the project can be extended, my wish is how best can we resource the rural dwellers to protect this environment, to make sure at the end of the day it will make impact, it will improve their livelihood, and for that matter help the country as a whole. I quite remember, like I was talking about the Etiwa Range Forest Reserve. In 2007, the community decided that they don't want any mining company to be there. How can we help and protect these people so that at the end of the day, their wishes will come true and protect the environment? Can we do anything with them and also with the top brass to ensure that together we protect our environment and safeguard our interests for the future? That's all I have to say. Thank you very much to all, and Sandra, God bless you all.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you for those wrap up. And then Leah, if you could have your perspective here, your conclusions as well, based on what you heard and some of the perspectives from the other speakers, your thoughts, please.
Okay, I believe what came out strongly was the need for sustainability and sustainable use. So I'm thinking of the alternative livelihoods, provision of alternative livelihoods for communities. This helps to conserve natural resources, because by the time communities or societies are moving to overexploitation or destruction of biodiversity, is due to the lack of alternative sources of income or livelihoods. So maybe a shift towards more diversified economies by countries, a shift from heavy dependence on natural resources. There are sectors which are not so heavy on that. In fact, most of the developed countries are hardly using the natural resources. Of course, there's a question of course, they might be getting them from other countries. Then, of course, embracing the issue of circularity and circular economy, which reduces, of course, the heavy extraction of raw materials, which is also good for the planet in terms of reduced exploitation, and for people because of the reduced pollution as well from some of these processes that convert the natural resources into the final products. And then the other thing is that we do not have a shortage of policies and frameworks and good recommendations from our countries or ministries and all these international and regional processes that we have going on. The challenge has been and remains the implementation of what we have agreed to do. So we always shift from, okay, we've agreed to do this action by 2015, and then come 2015, we just forget what we had not implemented and rename or rebrand the same actions, and then move on to try and implement those and then rename them again after 15 years. So it's never something new. It's basically coming back to the basics, and that is the sustainability of everything else around it. And yeah, really what I feel is the implementation of policies that have already been adopted. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. It's, bringing it back to basics. And on that note, so it's a bit what you mentioned, Abisha, is you need to have a workflow and a process, but then you also need the agility when it comes to biodiversity mainstream. So you can pick up on those opportunities and those changing contexts as well. Abisha, could I ask you to sort of in the last minutes or so that we have, just to outline for us, what are the next steps for the Connect project? What are you looking into? That's one. And also just to respond then to Consolata's point, of course. Please, Abisha.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephanie. It's really exciting to see that there's really, countries are really hungry to continue this exciting work. It has been really exciting if you see the results that, the three countries have come up with. And again, it's something that we are looking at to see how we can actually explore opportunities to maybe fundraise collaboratively with countries to see if we could continue this work and not just focusing at national level, but also try to reach what I mentioned earlier on, some sort of targeting subnational levels like districts and so on. So it's something that we are already exploring. We do have an idea actually in place that we'll be reaching out to countries to provide comments on, to see how best we can really embed all this good work that has been done in terms of how we can strengthen national systems for identifying and creating relevant biodiversity data, and also synthesizing that and packaging it in ways that are relevant to where the demand is for that biodiversity information. And also again continue working, of course, on mainstreaming of that that information in decision making processes, and also maybe try to include an element of peer-to-peer learning and leadership networks that may actually help as well to expedite this process at national level. But the key as well, I think that I need to mention to countries that it's not really about the project, but it's also the mindset of institutions to know that this is something that has to be part of, it may not be written in their terms of references, but given the nature of mainstreaming, it's also the mindset that they have to be able to sort of identify some of these emerging mainstreaming entry points and see how they can adapt the biodiversity information products that they've already developed as part of this project to sort of feed into those mainstreaming venues and avenues. But we'll be reaching out to the countries to see how best we can work together to continue this this really important work. And also, I think even to celebrate some of the successes that we can actually use some of the benefits that we've already made from the work that has been done by countries to sell it to even potential donors and even also governments to continue to support this work.
Thank you so much, Abhishan. Thank you. I think so. Just to wrap up, I think there's a clear need for this data and for what the Connect project has been doing as well. And I think another point that you mentioned is also this capacity development that was alluded to by several speakers. How can we actually train and share the knowledge and the best practices here as well? So very much to be continued for the Connect project. I'd like to thank very much all of our speakers for joining in today. Again, apologies for going a bit over time, but it's always difficult to stop people when they're giving such rich presentations and information. So thank you again for all your contributions. Also to our audience for tuning in today. Again, we will have a final session tomorrow on the value chain of biodiversity data. So please do register if you haven't, and we hope to see you there. Already wishing you a very nice evening, afternoon, and the rest of the day, and hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Ghana.